Welcome to the Equipping You in Grace podcast. We are so excited that you are joining us for the show today. This podcast aims to explore a biblical life view in a conversational tone. Let's join our host and founder of Servants of Grace, Dave Jenkins, for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening.
Welcome back to the Equipping You in Grace podcast. My name is Dave, and I'm the host for this podcast. And today's guest is Dayton Hartman. Dayton, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Hey, guys, today's episode is brought to you by Lexham Press. Visit the Lexham Press blog at blog.lexhampress.com and receive 2 free ebooks for subscribing to their updates. One of these is the Ephesians commentary in the EEC series, which D.A. Carson calls unquestionably the best technical commentary on Ephesians. Well, Dayton, I do want to welcome you again to the show. It's great to have you back. I think this is the 3rd time I've had you on now, so can you catch us up a little bit on what's going on in your life, marriage, ministry, and what writing projects are you working on?
Yeah, man, it's good to be back, and we're old buddies at this point, aren't we? A lot's been happening. In terms of my family, we just welcomed our 4th child. We had 4 straight boys. So there's a lot happening in the Hartman house right now. Our church is about to launch in a brand new facility, and man, that's been a marathon. And I'm excited to take off the general contractor hat and just stay in the pastorate. And in terms of writing, man, the Lord's provided a really good opportunity. My good buddy Walter Strickland and I here at Southeastern, we're editing together a book for a B&H academic that we really hope will bless and encourage the church. And it's coming out sometime early next year. And so we're trying to get that project wrapped up. And that's what I have on the docket right now, man. So that's a snapshot into my world.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on your new baby. That's very exciting for you and your wife. So congratulations.
Thanks, man.
And look forward to your next book, of course.
Man, I'll make sure you get a copy.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, I would love that.
Awesome.
Let me know how I can help promote that too, for sure.
Will do.
Well, can you please tell us about your book, Jesus Wins: The Good News of the End Times, why you wrote it, and how it's being received?
Yeah, so I actually really started writing this for our church. So and it just kind of turned into more of a book for a broader audience. So our church is very creedal, meaning that we really rally around 9 core beliefs, and they're largely grounded in the early creeds. And so one of the things that we as a church do is we say that what we believe about the consummation, the end of days, is that Jesus comes back and Jesus wins. And so I really wrote this largely for our church to explain, how we should think about these things in light of the unity Christians have, even though we have a wide spectrum of views in the end of days. And in the process of outlining it, I think this might actually be helpful for a broader audience. And man, I've been encouraged by how it's been received. Anytime Tim Challies is going to get a copy of your book, kind of like take a deep breath and like, man, I hope Tim likes it. And Tim read it and said some really encouraging things about it. And a number of bloggers have written reviews, and it's been largely encouraging. I've been shocked by how quickly it moved along, and people are reading it and responding and encouraging other people to read it. So I'm just praying the Lord uses it to encourage the church and give us hope on good days and hope on dark days.
So you're waiting with bated breath on what I think about it, right?
I am.
You're like, he brought me on his podcast to call him out public. No, I wouldn't do that. Well, would I? That's a good question. Would I bring somebody on a podcast to call them out? No, I wouldn't.
I guess I'm going to find out.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I am very, actually, I read it. I was very encouraged by it. I actually wasn't sure what to make of it when I picked it up. I was like, well, I knew it was going to be good because you wrote it, and you're a good writer, and I enjoy what you write, and so I was really encouraged. What I really liked about the book was you did exactly what you just said in your remarks there about the book, that you wanted to write to help people to understand not only the issue, but also how we can unite around the issue. And I think especially we both know this, on topics related to the end times. We can get into our views, and that's okay, but we have so much that Christians, especially as Protestant Christians, that we agree on, especially related, to the second coming. That's an essential of the faith, and the rest of it, the timing and the date, to me it matters, but it doesn't matter. And it's almost like I don't even engage in conversations about that, because personally I just think that it's important, but it's not really important, and it often is more heat than light. And I really, in particular, I really loved your second. Well, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I just really love that part where you're talking about where we unite as Christians. And so I thought the whole book was excellent, and for as short as it is, you cover a lot of information in a very short space. So that's even better. So
I appreciate that, man. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad I'm not getting called out.
No. Actually, I don't call people out. So if I don't like the book, I just don't bring them on the podcast. That's
hey, that's good to know. I'll mark that down for the future. If I don't get a call from Dave, he hated the book.
Oh, come on. Oh boy. Yeah. We're going to get ourselves in trouble here.
Yeah,
all right.
We should probably move along.
Yeah, moving along. There's nothing to see here, anybody. So next question. How can the Apostles' Creed help Christians not to fall into fear or speculation on the end times, but instead have hope, anticipation, joy, and confidence in the present and for the future?
Well, the Apostles' Creed is one of the oldest summaries of the contours of Christian orthodoxy, and what's just so amazing about the Creed is, man, Orthodox believers all around the world from all different traditions can unite and say, hey, we hold these truths, these core beliefs in common. And what I find so interesting is that in terms of being, the oldest, because a lot of times we think, man, let's just find out what the first Christians believed, and let's believe that. And what's interesting on this hot button issue of the end of days, man, what they say is Jesus is coming back to judge the living and the dead, and he wins. And that's what the early believers rallied around, even in the face of persecution from an empire that hated them, even in with trying to sort out different heresies that were cropping up, and there was a whole lot going on in the first few centuries. And yet, on this issue that Christians can so quickly divide and be hostile towards each other over, and they just said, hey, Jesus is coming back to judge the living and the dead, and Jesus wins. And that was the point of unity. Even though we know from early church fathers that there were a wide variety of speculations and views, even early in the life of the church, but still the rallying point for the church corporate, the church universal at that point was, hey, Jesus wins, praise God. And so I think that can help us, if things, if the days grow darker and begin to mirror for us in the West what happened to the Christians in the first few centuries, man, we can hold on to the hope Jesus come back and he wins. For our brothers and sisters around the world right now who are experiencing dark days, persecution, that same truth is good news for them. Jesus is coming back. He's going to make it right. He's going to win. And that's been a unifying hope since the first centuries.
Amen, brother. I love how Paul at the end of 2 Timothy he tells us that that to eagerly long for the day, the second coming of Christ. We're supposed to look forward to that day. That's not a point of contention. Yeah. That's he's urging Paul's urging Timothy to look forward to that day and to be encouraged by that, and to live in light of it. And I think that we miss that. And, when we focus on, the date and the time aspect of things and the chart and all that, we miss the fact that the Bible encourages us in this way. It encourages us to look towards the day and to be encouraged that Jesus is coming back, and that he is coming back, and that's a sure fact.
Yeah.
So I can't remember how many verses and all that, but it's like I think I've heard 2 or 3 times as many references to the second coming as to the first coming, or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's really, really a good answer. How does understanding the already not yet of the kingdom of God help Christians grow in their understanding of the end times?
Sometimes we default to this idea that, man, we're just waiting for Jesus to come back, which is, as you pointed out, a biblical hope, something we should hope for. But right now, it's just kind of like this hunker down and get in the bunker and just wait. And when in reality, the already not yet tension that's found in Scripture is that the kingdom of Christ is here now, and yet it's coming in its fullest form when Christ returns. And so that helps us now to have fuel for the mission of, let's go ahead and begin previewing the kingdom of Christ on earth as we live as a gospel people, picturing the gospel work of Christ, the restoration of all things, as we love our neighbor, love our cities, preach the gospel, a gospel of reconciliation and hope, and yet we can acknowledge that things are broken and still not as they ought to be, but when Jesus comes back, he's going to get us back to the garden, things will be right, and we'll have restoration in its complete form, the kingdom of Christ in its most visible, tangible form on earth. And so that already not yet tension, if we're fine with that tension, we're willing just to own it and live in it, instead of making us fearful and then hunker down and get in the bunker and hide from the world, we actually engage the world more with the gospel, with our words and with our actions as a preview of, well, the king has come and won ultimate victory, the death, burial, and resurrection, and he's coming back again with the kingdom that's full of form, and let's prepare for him.
That's so good. I know a few years ago I was studying Luke, and I was just struck by it, and I've read Luke many, many times at this point. But when you're actually studying a passage, you're digging into it, you get more out of it, and so I was studying it, and I started noticing this idea of the already and not yet. And this is probably 8 years ago or so, 9 years ago, and I was just really struck by it, and it really kind of changed my view of end times, which we don't need to get into that, but it just helped me to. Well, I was really pre-trib, premillennial, and I'm definitely historical pre-mill now, but just in case anybody wonders, but it really changed my view of just it helped me to, I think, have a better understanding of the end times as a whole. Just seeing how in Luke and then in the Gospels and in Acts, and then once you start seeing it there, you start seeing it everywhere. You start really noticing that this is the tension of the Bible. And it just was really helpful to me, helped me just to understand more of that the kingdom of God, yes, is both here and it's yet coming, and that's that idea is all throughout the epistles, all throughout the Gospels. So when you grab hold of that, it's just really paradigm shifting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you give us a brief guided tour through the various views on the end times? Now that we are already talking about our various views.
Yeah. So. Really kind of the dividing line for the views of the, you want to call the end times, it really, what is the rule and reign of Christ like in the millennial period? So amillennial thinkers would say the rule and reign is not a physical, literal reign of Christ on the throne, in Jerusalem, but it's now present in and through his people, and at some point Christ will return. So for the amillennial thinker, there's just this, at any minute, it can all be wrapped up. And then for postmillennial thinkers, it's that Christ is ruling and reigning now and through his people, and the advance of the church, the proclamation of the gospel is going to go to the ends of the earth. The world will increasingly come under the rule and reign of Christ, and then Christ returns to sit on his throne. And historic premillennial thinkers would still see Christ coming in a literal physical reign, and then a subset of premillennialism which is newer in terms of its historical presence, is dispensational premillennialism, which is would be like Left Behind, would be maybe the common framework that people would know that by. Just a couple of hundred years old as a system, it would be kind of a subset of premillennialism. But what's interesting to me is when you really get back into the early church fathers, trying to pick out who believes what, and everybody tries to pick partial phrases and words that they think support their particular view among the early church fathers. But one of the things that struck me in my research was just how similar the early fathers were, even when they're describing different positions. So one of the things that's really nuanced, and we're using 20th century terminology, 21st century terminology to talk about first and second and third century theological concepts, and so we are being a little anachronistic with it, and so that makes it cumbersome. But what you notice is those who are historically attributed to be some of the amillennial thinkers in the early church, and those who would really be clearly early historic premill mill thinkers, what you begin to see that's interesting is actually one of the most curious similarities between the two is a millennial thinker would not see the millennial age as a calendar, like a date on the calendar that marks the beginning of the age, and a date on the calendar 1,000 years later to the date that marks the end of it, but is a definite period of time, but not necessarily 1,000 years, right? Whereas historic pre-mill, and it seems like in its earliest form, was actually similar in that regard, in that it saw the 1,000 years as literal but not precise. That it would signify a long period of time in which Christ would physically rule and reign. And some early church fathers still thought it was a literal 1,000 years to the day type thing, but some of them saw it more as a definite period of time that Christ will physically reign on earth, but it's not a 1,000 years to the day type thing. And so there are all these just little nuanced similarities. It was like, oh wow, so these forefathers of our faith and trying to sort through these things, grapple with these things. A lot of them had some of the same questions we still have 2,000 years later, and so in seeing the broad spectrum of them, I try to just do a 30,000 foot overview in the book. I try to highlight some of the differences that are significant and do matter, but then to really highlight the similarities that are even nuanced or significant similarities, so that we can see these things matter. They are distinct, and yet there is so much similarity and overlap that we can call each other brother and sister, even though we may hold conflicting views of how it's all going to wrap up when Christ returns.
That is really well said. Thank you, brother. Why is it so important that Christians understand what the creeds teach on the end times?
Mainly because I think what we've gotten into is this idea that we have to extrapolate from the scriptures just this very precise system with times and dates, and that's just not what Christians have historically done. Historically, Christians have taken a position on a framework, yes, but they've largely, again, rallied around what the creeds say. And you look at the earliest creeds, and there's just such continuity, even when they're speaking with great specificity to important issues. When they talk about the consummation, they talk about Jesus coming back and Jesus wins, and that's the unifying point of orthodoxy. And I think that can be a helpful framework for us as believers, where there are certain theological positions that we should hold, and I think some are right and some are wrong, and that we should explore and defend and debate. But there's a whole set of core Christian doctrines where we can look at a brother or sister across the table. So this is end times, and then there are others. And we can just say, man, let's have a robust conversation about this over coffee, but at the end of the day, we're still family. And so I think grabbing hold of the creeds on this hot button issue can help us learn how to grab a hold of the creed on other hot button issues.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. What I appreciate is have a robust conversation. Notice the word robust. Yeah. That doesn't mean that you're belittling anybody or saying, well, you're less of a Christian because, you believe in what you believe in. I think the thing that we should do is we should encourage people to study the text and study the different views and then look at what does the Bible actually say. If somebody has a well-formed and conviction about, a certain point of contention, like my wife and I, we differ on the pre-trib position, and we have respectful. This is just one example. My wife and I, we disagree on this particular point. We don't disagree on much, but we disagree on this, but we have robust conversation without it being insulting. Thankfully, yeah, that's important.
That's good.
I'll be like, well, I don't agree with you, and I probably go a little too far on that, but that's where I need to grow. But be gentle, especially when you're talking with your spouse. I have had many guys tell me, they can't even talk with their wife about theology because they maybe talked about this or some other thing, and having robust conversation with your spouse or other people, it's good. But remember, they might not have a theological education, and they have well-formed views, and to be respectful and gentle and loving. How would you like it if somebody said, no, you're wrong, and after you've studied, and it's just something that we need to, I think, do better, and it's what I appreciate so much about your book.
That's right, man. We need to treat each other in love as family.
How do the guardrails of the creeds help Christians to keep their end times view as a secondary matter instead of a primary one?
Yeah, so one of the the creeds really do help us in that they're derived from the Scriptures. They're a summation of the Scriptures, a faithful summary of what the Bible teaches Christians believe. And so as long as you're in the bounds of the creeds, which I like to think of as guardrails on the highway of theology, you're free to disagree on these secondary nuances. And so I think it's just helpful to remember what are the bounds of orthodoxy, because the difficulty for us as believers is we get so passionate about secondary issues that we elevate them to the point of primary issues, and we're ready to question the orthodoxy, the salvation of brothers and sisters simply because they're not outside the highway, they're not outside the guardrails, they're just in a different lane. And so instead of sharing the proverbial theological road with them, we're ready to go demolition derby, and it's so unhealthy and so unhelpful, which is again going back to the robust conversation, but it's a family conversation. And as long as we remember, hey, if we're in the guardrails, we are family. We should share the road and learn how to talk about why we're in the lane we're in a way that is winsome and encouraging and mutually builds up the body. I think that would benefit the church, especially on hot button issues like the end times.
I have kind of a funny story to tell just on this point. So the church that we go to, the pastor is preacher premillennial. It's a MacArthur type, heavily influenced church, so that tells you something about where they land on these issues. But he said, he's like, we don't make this a litmus test for membership or anything like that, which I really appreciate. But he also said, this is a secondary thing. It was very impressive, actually. But the funny part was, he's like, so if you're going on your way up to heaven, if I'm right, and you're, I'm pre-trib, so, if we get called up in the air, you have to tell me as we're going up that, I was right or something like that. And, if I'm wrong, and we stay or whatever, I'll tell you you're right. Okay. Do we have a deal? And he actually preached this in the thing. I thought it was one of the best things I think I've ever heard from a pastor on, this subject. And it was it kind of encapsulated what you're talking about unity and loving and not making this a primary issue. The second coming is a primary issue, but it was just really so. I was like, wow, I want to stay here. I know what he thinks about it, absolutely. But and I guess that would be something that pastor. I wish more. I've been in church since I was 5, and I've never heard a pastor talk like in that way. And I wish that more pastors would talk about it that way. Maybe even make fun of themselves a little bit, and on this topic, and have a little fun with it, and to help people understand the seriousness of it as well, which is a very serious topic, but it also, we have room to have conversation and to disagree. So
for sure.
Where's a good place for someone just starting to learn about the end times to begin reading?
Man, it's going to sound self-serving, but I really wrote my book in part for the folks in our church who had a lot of questions about this and wanted to better understand our official position as a church, that Jesus wins, and that's what we rally around, and how to understand the wide spectrum of the issue. So I really wrote this book to be kind of the starting point for folks to understand the topic of the end times and eschatology in general. So I think there, and then really moving beyond there to maybe a more advanced interaction of these topics, Zondervan and really a couple of publishers now have really put out a number of kind of counterpoint series where you'll have roughly 100 pages from a scholar arguing for a position, and then a few pages each from 2 or 3 other scholars explaining why they disagree. And so for those then wanting maybe something beyond that, I think a counterpoints book now that you know what these issues are and kind of the broad picture of Christian eschatology, maybe seeing some scholars interact with each other more exegetical level could be super helpful.
That's a really good answer. Really good. Why did you include the Athanasian Creed in this book?
One, most Christians have never read it, so anytime I can get a creed out there that people haven't read a lot, I get excited about that. But also because the Athanasian Creed, it's very precise and it's lengthy, and it's very precise and lengthy on important issues. But what I love about it is it defines some of the important issues, theology proper and Christology, with a great deal of precision in terms of the detail with which it explains the position being summarized. And so I think there's a great illustration to see how detailed it is on those issues, and yet how simple and straightforward it is on the end times. So where once again it echoes the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. Jesus wins, and so it's significant in my mind that this very important creed is so detailed on important issues of deity of Christ and theology proper, and yet when it comes to talking about the important issue of the second coming, the point of Christian unity being argued for is simply Jesus is coming back, he wins.
Amen, brother. And I mean, you wrote a book on creeds, so you've got to plug the creeds at every opportunity, right?
That's right. Hey, man, and I do. I love it. If I can find a place to put one, I'm going to put it.
Good job, man. Good job. How would you counsel a Christian who comes to you and is fearful about the future?
I would ask them why they're fearful. One of the most helpful things for me, as I was very early in my adult life, really wrestling with a lot of these things, was when I became acquainted with church history, and I saw that Christians throughout history, there's just been these kind of these flashpoint moments where Christians in different parts of the world became almost universally fearful, or convinced that this was it, this is the end, everything's going down, and the days are going to get darker. And amazingly, every time that happened, whether that was in the 200s, the 300s, the 500s, going towards 1000 AD, Y1K was a big deal, and then for us in the modern era, Y2K was a big deal, and Christians thought, man, this is it. Bill Gates is in cahoots with Satan himself and has programmed the computers to take the world down, and turned out that we were all afraid for nothing. That historically Christians fall into this rhythm of fear, and whenever we do that, we take our eyes off of the hope and victory of Jesus, and ultimately how things wrap up and when they wrap up are in his hands. And so often our fear of the future issue is really a questioning or a distrust in the sovereignty of God issue. And so we need to hold to the sure hope of the second coming of Jesus, but often there's a whole lot more going on when we're afraid about the future. It's a lot more underneath the hood, so to speak, of our fears than just I'm uneasy about tomorrow. And so I've talked with Christians who have said, I'm scared for the direction of the world. And it's like, well, the Western world is lurching towards a more difficult place for Christians, but that's just where the rest of the world has been for nearly 2,000 years. And we're just now tasting it. And yet, Jesus has never left his throne, and he's on his throne now. And if days get darker, he'll be on his throne. If days get better, he'll still be on his throne. And he still is coming back. And the words in the book of Revelation, he's coming back soon. And so that's kind of a long answer to a short question.
That's a really good answer. Yeah, and I like that you said you ask questions, because I think that's really good. Maybe you could say something about that. Why is asking, well, not as why is asking good questions, but what would that look like? How do pastors ask good questions, not only about this, but just, as they're caring for people?
Yeah, I even had someone today, just kind of an impromptu counseling session, just talking about a relational issue they were having. Was very serious, and some of their angst and concerns over it. And so I began asking them questions about career, about what's important to them in life, and what makes them feel like a success or a failure. And was able to get at the issue of, ultimately what you worship is what you get your identity from. Ultimately what you are finding your identity in is really what you're worshiping. It really helped them see that some of their angst over a relationship was really a worship problem, not so much really maybe a relational problem. So I think that often we tend just to try, and a person says, here's my problem, and let me try to come up with a real quick prescription. When in reality, often to be a good pastor, you've got to dig around a little bit in the fold, so to speak, and see what all this sheep has had going on around them, to really understand if what they think is wrong is actually what's wrong. And so just asking good probing questions like, okay, back up. Let's just talk about your life in general. Tell me about what's going on in your relationships, what's going on in your prayer life. Are there secret sins you're battling? Just really digging around just to see if does what they think is the problem, does it actually match what their answers are revealing the problem probably to be. And just asking good probing questions is super important to know how to truly shepherd somebody and not just shepherd them in the way they think they need to be shepherded, but to shepherd them in the way that you as a shepherd now see they need to be cared for.
Man, that's gold, really. Gold. Good stuff. So Dayton, as we wrap up this conversation, there's a lot that we could really, have dived into and everything, especially on the different views as listeners go and pick up your book. Can you give us a few takeaways on this topic or even on your book?
Yeah, I think one of the things that actually is my favorite part of the book is when we think about the grand scheme of all of human history, and then we really have to frame our eschatology, our view of the end times, in the grand scheme of all of history, because it's part of God's story that he invites us into, is to really see how the entire story of the Bible is God's work to get us back to the Garden of Eden, the place where we could be with him face to face, unencumbered, in right relationship. And that the book ends with God bringing the garden city, New Jerusalem, to earth. And in the description in the book of Revelation, in terms of what's present in New Jerusalem, the garden city, mirrors the description of what was present in the Garden of Eden. And I think when we actually step back and see that that's actually the story, it's not so much of what God's going to do to whatever it is we're afraid of in life, whatever it is that we view as the evil or ills of the world. God will mete out justice. Jesus will mete out justice on the final day, for sure. But when we see that really what we're looking at towards the end of all things is when we get back to the garden, now a garden city, face to face with the Lord, that will reframe the way we think about the subject, the way we think about the topic, the way that we talk about it. So honestly, that's if I were to encourage someone, please read one chapter in the book, it would probably be that chapter, just to try and help folks reframe the story of the Bible so that they see that the intro, the beginning in Genesis is really building towards Revelation, and it's all part of one cohesive story with one cohesive hope.
Well said, brother. Well, I really appreciate the time that you've given to me today and to our listeners, brother, and just continue to pray Christ's richest blessings on you.
Hey, thank you, Dave. It's fun to be back, man.
Yeah, definitely. Anytime, brother. Anytime. I'd like to thank Lexham Press for sponsoring today's episode. Don't forget to visit blog.lexhampress.com to receive a free commentary on Ephesians and a great book on preaching, both free for subscribing to their updates.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you were encouraged by today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. For more uplifting and thought-provoking content, please visit us online at servantsofgrace.org. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Servants of Grace, and on Facebook at facebook.com/servantsofgrace. We hope you have a blessed day, and we will see you next time.